On March 1st, 2021, I woke up in Washington, D.C., landed in Austin, took a bus, walked from the stop to my house, and had 1 hour before I started working on this effort. While in DC, I had participated in a Zoom panel on homelessness, during which I saw one of the members of my old church who had considered involving me with the Junior League, which I would have no longer seen as activism. I was already dealing with the reality that some kinds of activism were only for appearances and that black people were expected to defer to white leadership. For whatever reason, I still had hope that people had meant what they said in not only refusing to elect Trump, but participating in the voting activism of 2020. Mostly black women had been in the news, but as black people were only a maximum of 14.5% of the population, and that includes those overseas and imprisoned, I believed that there had to be more than just us. Like all Zoom meetings, it started out with everyone introducing ourselves and explaining our activism, which I had expected based on all of the coverage of people in Zoom meetings during the lockdowns, although this was right about the time those ended in Austin. One of the participants had actually been displaced from East Austin, and she began by explaining her experience, and the city liaisons thanked her for her story. That hit me the wrong way on the right day, so I unmuted myself and said rather aggressively, "Do you think this is a show? This isn't Netflix. This is her life." Everyone got quiet for a second, and the participant elaborated further on how it felt to be displaced. One of the city liaisons apologized for treating the experience like entertainment, and that was the last time during this effort that any of the staff treated lived experience like a show. People within the dominant narrative have a bad habit of distancing themselves from the experiences of black people and thinking that we exist for the entertainment of others. This may be one of the reasons that there is little thought given to all cultural appropriation of black people, especially rap, which was created out of the radical movement in a response to respectability politics. If our experiences were unreal, then the people would never consider themselves as part of a system that was deliberately harmful. Consequently, too many people see racism as something in a movie, on television, or other consumable media, not something they or the systems are doing. People without insight cannot be reasoned with, no matter how long we wait. Until people view racism as actually happening in the same reality of other people, they will feel no responsibility to rectify the conditions. If people are too busy trying to fit all BIPOC individuals within the dominant narrative, eventually we realize that the beneficiaries and sycophants do not truly want to understand us. The group continued to meet once a week for 2 hours, and there were constant discussions on how developers would try to get around them. Many people talked about housing construction being a solution to lower housing costs, but having just seen the explosion of luxury housing, I raised that question, and people changed the subject. I also pointed out that there was a great deal of empty housing around the city, and there was no reason for further construction, since people would argue about the market as an excuse to price out certain demographics. The biggest problem I saw was that people were looking to solve an actual problem that might make it easier for them to live in this ridiculously expensive city, but the city was more often learning to make money. Some of us were invited to participate in an anti-racism course, and although I had been to some seminars on the topic, this was my first workplace training. It was taught by a black man, white woman, Latinx woman, and the Latinx woman was replaced by a black woman towards the end of the week. There were also various city staff participating, which made me much more hopeful than I should have been. During the week, I truly appreciated the black man discussed how he used to fall for the lies of transit-oriented development and urban renewal. Too often, there is a discussion about how white people have been racist, but not that black people have internalized self-hatred because we have been consistently denied access to our history, especially because some of our parents moved to mostly white suburbs as a flex. It became very common for many millennials and younger people to be consumed by the dominant narrative and think of ourselves as better. When the white trainer spoke, she pointedly discussed enjoying the control that her whiteness provided because she was under no impression that she was either innocent or ignorant about it. We were talking about which parts of our culture that we appreciated the most, and she was honest, instead of trying to drag up European ancestry to which she had no relationship. She pointed out that while all of us had actual cultural aspects to what we stated, she had no specific examples to give because there was no real culture to her identity. Because whiteness had no specific lineage and people could become white at any time, there were no defining characteristics, which is why white people felt so comfortable appropriating the cultures of so many people. Both she and the black teacher discussed the disparate funding for displacement and the fact that only East Austin was an acceptable place to experiment while West Austin was kept more sacred for its residents. The city staff who was there spoke less during this moment, and there was even someone I knew from the Democratic Socialists of America who apologized for her behavior when the council member candidate was questioned in the past. There was one moment when the city had already outlined plans to use all $300 million to purchase land instead of doing anything that they said they were going to do for equity, and unfortunately for them, I found the information in the city minutes. All people working on the equity anti-displacement tool were livid and made plans to attend a meeting in person, which I declined as I had already found and relayed the information. Since the city council and all the boards and commissions had demonstrated their disinterest in black voices, I chose not to yell into the abyss. Again, people who are not receptive to feedback can use all the energy of anyone trying to inform them about their problematic behavior. After that meeting, people felt a little more positive and were further energized into working on the project, and our part ended in August. Someone approached the group to make videos about our part in creating the equity anti-displacement tool, stating that the opportunity would be paid. Initially, I signed up for it, but the timing happened around the same time that the Pedestrian and Bicycling Advisory Council had been misogynistic, and the collaboration leader had gotten off without anyone other than me calling him out on his heinous behavior. I was not in the mood to talk about how great the city was, nor was I interested in smiling on camera for a collaboration that was fraught with tension based on how easily people dismiss concerns about racial equity. I held one conversation with the video organizer and politely declined, which was a good move since she had wanted some nonsensical touchy-feely garbage about how the process had transcended race, which it had not. In the fall, different activists were supposed to present to various boards and commissions about the equity anti-displacement tool, and I accepted the responsibility not only because I could use the money, but because I was not intimidated by educated or rich people. Some people are, because elites are generally very nasty, condescending individuals who think that they have nothing to improve because they are perfection. During my actual presentation to the commission, one of the commissioners was concerned about how the equity anti-displacement tool would affect West Austin, and I said that the entire city would fall under the purview of the tool. The same commissioner had the audacity to suggest that West Austin get a BIPOC representative to protect West Austin, to which I curtly responded that East Austin had not been attacking West Austin, but that council had listened to West Austin directives nonstop. The equity officer tried to reduce the tension, but I refused to let that commissioner lie and say that West Austin had been steadily under attack for a long time. Before the meeting, I had seen the unfortunate senatorial candidate, and she smiled as if we were friends despite my falling out with the organization. I kept a polite but firm distance, and to no one's surprise, she began latching on to the sole black woman serving as a commissioner. Afterwards, I met an East Austinite I had actually met back when I helped with the Gisalo bike tour, and she discussed the natural springs in East Austin that nobody cared about poisoning based on the industrial development. We both talked about how the only environmental causes worth protecting seemed to be in white areas, while everyone else was forced to deal with the responsibility of being solely used for economic growth. She got my Decipher City contact, and we both left the meeting after I finished presenting. Well, West Austin does not like having its control questioned, so even though I was scheduled for other presentations, including one in Northeast Austin, all of the presentations were canceled because there was suddenly a legal issue to discuss. The problem with all racial equity work is that most white people want to look good without doing anything that could possibly hurt their superior position, and the government's responsibility seems to be to comply. Essentially, blackness is allowed to speak as long as whiteness wins. That is a failure to recognize that punishing people for speaking out is justifying abuse. After a month, the city council twisted the knife further by taking credit for the equity anti-displacement tool and announcing that there would be a legal review. All the team members discussed the result, but since people had already gone to a city council meeting and the council had failed to stand up for the tool, nobody felt like participating in a degrading process, especially for as little as we received, approximately $1,500 for work from March 2021 until November 2021. For those who believe that we should be grateful for that much, I would remind those same people that there are inspirational speakers who make thousands of dollars at one gig. Inequitable funding of activists of color is rampant within the dominant narrative activism. A while ago, a very good black friend of mine engaged with the foster system and arrived at Yale University in 1999, which is how we met. Through some ups and downs, she eventually became a lawyer, got married, and moved to Washington, D.C., and sought out churches to join for building community. The family settled on a more racially integrated church, but while they were attending, people found out that my friend had made it through the foster system. Gleefully, they invited her to speak at a function, bragging about how they usually had to spend $15,000 for a speaker, but they were excited about being able to gain a free speaker since my friend happened to be going to their church. My friend carefully asked them why they felt entitled to her work for free instead of paying her $15,000, especially since the family had multiple small children to nurture. After wiping the glee off their faces, the church members tried to backpedal and discuss limited resources, and of course, expounding on how grateful the children would be for her experience and triumphs. Not surprisingly, my friend declined, and the family stopped attending that church, deciding that the expectation of free labor from black people was entirely inappropriate. There was one more fake engagement I attended in October 2022, but by then the city was still attempting to keep the project in limbo by saying that there were legal issues to discuss and nobody had heard anything about its progress. Also by then, the equity officer had left the city, and the equity office will likely be dissolved based on the new regime in the United States. Someone at the community engagement event pointed out that the city had promised that the tool would be in place, but instead of being able to see it, the city kept talking about legal issues. In the end, there was no meeting because the next phase was the city's usual tactic: create a panel to analyze whether the tool would be effective. The panel would put the tool in a variety of scenarios and describe the process to developers and city staff. By the time I quit participating in the city's distraction tactics on racial equity, the bigot mayor who destroyed East Austin had been reelected, and the panel was still investigating. Of course, by then, nobody cared. This is generally what whiteness demands: watching BIPOC residents struggle to enact change while steadily blocking our efforts and blaming us for its unwavering commitment to abuse. A policy is only racist if it attempts to undo systemic injustice for non-white people, but it is considered normal if it emphasizes the dominant narrative. At some point, if working for a goal that depends on cooperation is fruitless, then we should become disengaged and do something else. Sometimes, trying to see the good in everyone makes someone just as unsafe as the powers they pretend to defy. Activists do not owe beneficiaries and sycophants the right to ignore our pain and satisfy the delusion. This process demonstrated another example of how when the dominant narrative states that it wants to engage with BIPOC communities, it means a demand for legitimizing racist behavior. The thought process is, would displacement really be considered wrong if BIPOC residents agreed to it? Moreover, being chastised for disengagement after refusing to admit to ignoring communities is racial hatred, no matter how many Democrat boxes one checks. If the city could not produce an equity plan with an intent to follow through and provide results, then the city merely developed a gaslighting plan to further alienate its BIPOC population. Standards have generally been created to take things away from BIPOC communities, not hold the dominant narrative accountable. Thus, the equity assessment tool was dead on arrival because the dominant narrative does not think of BIPOC scholars and activists as inherent equals. It has done nothing wrong, so why change?